Welcome to Forever and Always Regency Romance, where love gets messy, hearts get tangled, and somehow it all still ends in a swoon-worthy happily ever after. If you're into slow burns, heartfelt drama, and just enough charm to make you grin mid-laundry, you're exactly where you should be. New stories drop every week, so hit that subscribe button. Your future self will thank you. The Bride by Proxy. Chapter 1. The Bride Arrives. Ashbourne Hall, Warwickshire, April 1814. The rain came down in grey, relentless sheets as Eleanor Worthing stepped from the creaking carriage onto the gravel drive of Ashbourne Hall. Her slippers sank slightly into the wet stones, and the hem of her pale blue travelling gown had long since darkened with rain. She held her bonnet in one hand, its ribbons fluttering against her damp gloves, and with the other, she clutched a worn valise to her chest. She had not expected a welcome party, but she had not expected silence either. Ashbourne Hall loomed before her, severe and sprawling, its ancient stone walls streaked with rain, ivy clinging like old regrets to the surface. The great front door, dark oak with heavy iron fittings, stood closed and cold, as though it had been waiting a long time to be opened. She stepped forward, careful not to slip, and raised her hand to knock. Before she could, the door opened from within. A footman should have answered. A butler. Anyone but the man who now stood before her. Captain Nathaniel Blackthorne, the newly titled Earl of Ashbourne, filled the doorway with a tall, severe presence. His military coat was still wet with rain, clinging to his broad shoulders. His dark curls were slightly dishevelled, his cravat still neatly tied, though travel had left him looking like a man caught between battle and home. He was devastatingly handsome and absolutely unwelcoming. His face was angular and pale, with a strong jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the colour of cold steel. "Lady Ashbourne," he said. His voice was low, deliberate, and edged in frost. "How clever of you to arrive during a storm. Did you hope to catch me off guard?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around her valise. "I came as soon as I received word you had returned, my lord. I thought you would wish to speak." He stepped back, granting her entrance without further comment. The entrance hall was grand but dim, lit only by a flickering chandelier above and the damp scent of old wood and stone. His boots echoed against the marble floor as he shut the door behind her. "You thought I would wish to speak," he said again, as if testing the shape of the words. "Fascinating." She turned to face him, lifting her chin. "I had no part in the arrangement," she said quietly. "I never would have—" "Of course not," he interrupted. "You just married into a title and fortune, entirely by accident." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because he clearly believed them. Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment, the room seemed colder. She had rehearsed this conversation more times than she could count. Not with words exactly, but with hopes and fears and silent prayers in the dead of night. From the moment Lady Strathmore had told her of the arrangement, an old agreement between the Blackthorne and Strathmore families, quietly revived after the Earl's death, Eleanor had tried to believe it was all done in good faith. Lady Strathmore, her godmother and guardian since her father's death, had meant well, or so Eleanor had thought. The Countess Dowager of Strathmore, once married to Nathaniel's uncle, had moved in society's highest circles for decades. She had known both the former Earl and Eleanor's late mother, and she had insisted that the match was not only proper, but necessary. That Nathaniel would understand once he returned from Spain. That he had given his consent, albeit indirectly. That the match would provide Eleanor with safety, stability, and perhaps in time, even affection. She had been wed to him in name only, in a quiet London drawing room, with a solicitor and a proxy to stand in the groom's place. Proxy marriages, while legal, were rare in England. more common among royals or military men stationed abroad. They required a man of trust to stand in place of the groom, vows exchanged on his behalf. In Eleanor's case, the arrangement had been made in haste, with little ceremony and no real courtship. Nathaniel had been in Spain. She had never heard his voice, never seen his handwriting, and yet she had spoken vows that bound her life to his. Such things were usually accompanied by letters, gifts, a ring, but she had received none of these, just a legal document and the title of Countess. It was no wonder he suspected her. She hardly knew how it had come to this herself. She had not expected love, only kindness. But now, standing in the grand entrance of Ashbourne Hall, watching her husband's cold gaze, she realised just how foolish she had been. "I married because Lady Strathmore insisted on it," she said. "My father was ill. I trusted her." He looked away for a moment, the line of his jaw tightening. "Strathmore has always been skilled in arranging things to her liking. I suppose I should thank her for completing the transaction without consulting me." The silence stretched between them. Eleanor, standing in the grand entrance of her new home, suddenly felt very small. Not because of the size of the hall or the weight of the title, but because of the ache pressing behind her ribs. He was more handsome than she had imagined, and colder than she had feared. She set her valise down gently on the floor. "I understand this is not what you wanted," she said, her voice steady now. "And I will not pretend I can make it right overnight. But I will not be ashamed of trying. I will not apologize for wishing to be your wife in more than name." His eyes met hers. For a breathless moment, she saw something shift. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper, hidden behind the frost. He turned away before she could be sure. "You may have the east wing," he said. "We will dine at 8. If you require anything, speak with the housekeeper." She watched him walk away, his boots echoing down the corridor, his shoulders tense beneath his coat. Alone in the hall, Eleanor exhaled slowly. She picked up her valise, lifted her chin, and turned toward the east wing. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. She was Lady Ashbourne now, whether he wanted her or not, and she would prove herself worthy of the title, one moment at a time. Chapter 2. The Dinner Duel. The east wing of Ashbourne Hall was quieter than Eleanor expected. No servants lingered. No fire had been laid. The walls were lined with portraits of Blackthorne ancestors, all painted in the same sombre tones, their faces sharp and unsmiling. No one came to greet her. No introductions were made. Eleanor was shown to her chambers by a stranger, and the rest of the staff kept to the shadows. She did not even know the housekeeper's name. She passed beneath the ancestor's gaze, holding her sodden valise, and tried not to shiver. Her room was large but cold, dressed in fine but aged fabrics, with burgundy damask curtains, a high canopied bed, and a fireplace that had not seen warmth in weeks. She placed her belongings carefully on the settee and went at once to the bell pull to request hot water. No one came. Eventually, a quiet knock on the door announced a young maid, no more than 15, who entered with a bowed head and a bundle of towels. She said little, only that the water would be up shortly, then curtsied and disappeared down the corridor before Eleanor could ask her name. After washing and changing, she chose her gown with care. Soft grey cotton muslin, high-waisted, with a delicate trim of pearl beading at the sleeves. Her hair had dried into gentle waves, and she left a few tendrils loose at her temples. When she looked in the mirror, she did not see a countess, only a woman doing her best, and she told herself that was enough. At 10 minutes to 8, she stepped into the grand, formal dining hall. It was enormous, lined with gilt-framed portraits and lit by a dozen candles in silver sconces. The long mahogany table gleamed in the soft light, polished and empty, except for 2 place settings at one end. She hesitated, uncertain where to sit. A footman entered from the far door, paused and gave a brief bow. "Beg pardon, my lady. You are to dine in the smaller room this evening." Eleanor blinked. "I see. Thank you." She followed him out without another word, her cheeks warm with quiet embarrassment. She had assumed, and she had been wrong. The smaller dining room was cosy by comparison, with low candlelight and simple linen. 2 places had been set. She waited alone. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted meat. She had requested nothing and assumed the cook had followed the usual routine. Whatever was served, she would accept it gratefully. 8 o'clock came. 8:15. At 8:20, footsteps echoed in the corridor. She stood quickly, smoothing her gown, her heart fluttering high in her chest. The door opened, and in stepped Nathaniel. He was freshly changed from his travel-worn uniform, now in a deep black evening coat with a perfectly tied white cravat. His hair had been combed back, though a single wave curled rebelliously at his temple. His expression, however, was unreadable. Then behind him came another figure, a woman, tall, poised, and gliding across the floor with practiced elegance. She wore a shimmering gown of deep plum, fitted to her elegant frame, and her dark blonde hair was styled in perfect Grecian waves. Her mouth curled in a knowing smile as her eyes fell on Eleanor. "Darling, I had no idea we were dining en famille this evening," she said lightly, her voice dipped in honey and something sharper. "You should have told me." Eleanor blinked. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Lady Selina," he said flatly. "May I present my wife, the Countess of Ashbourne?" Selina turned her gaze toward Eleanor, lips parting in soft surprise. "Oh, how lovely. So it's true then. I had heard whispers, but you know how the season is. Full of stories. I must say, my dear, you are younger than I expected." Eleanor's spine straightened. She met the woman's gaze without flinching. "How kind of you to join us. I hope you enjoy the dinner." Selina raised a brow. "How charming." Nathaniel moved to pour himself a glass of wine. He did not offer to pour for Eleanor. The meal passed in brittle conversation. Selina reminisced about dances in Vienna, operas in Paris, and long rides through Richmond Park, casually tossing memories in Eleanor's direction like little polished daggers. There were no vulgarities, only the soft-edged cruelty of the well-bred. Eleanor did not rise to any of it. She passed the bread. She smiled. She kept her voice calm. But inside, her heart ached. Not because Selina was cruel, but because Nathaniel said nothing, no defence, no kindness, nothing at all. When the dessert was brought in, a lemon syllabub with curls of candied peel, Eleanor finally spoke. "I imagine you have known my husband a long time, Lady Selina." Selina laughed, reaching lazily for her spoon. "Indeed. Nathaniel and I go back years. He used to be quite the romantic before Spain hardened him." "And now?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but even. Selina tilted her head, studying her. "Now he chooses silence over sentiment, as you have likely noticed." Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. He met her gaze for the first time all evening. She did not look away. "Even silence can be broken in time," she said quietly. She folded her napkin with slow, deliberate care. "Thank you both for your company. I find I'm suddenly very tired. Please excuse me." She rose. Her hands were steady, her posture straight. And as she left the room, she did not falter. Not until the door was closed behind her and her footsteps disappeared down the corridor. Behind her, Nathaniel remained seated, unmoving. Only Selina's smile lingered. Chapter 3. A fire left unlit. The morning after the uncomfortable dinner passed slowly, damp and grey. Rain still tapped against the tall windows of Eleanor's chamber, blurring the view of the gardens beyond. She sat in the carved armchair near the hearth, wrapped in a shawl, hands curled around a cup of tea that had gone cold. There had been no word from Nathaniel, no apology, no note. She had not expected one. Still, some part of her had hoped. At 9:30, a knock came at the door, a quiet one. When Eleanor opened it, she found the same shy maid from the night before, holding a folded note on a silver tray. "A message from Lord Ashbourne, my lady," the girl murmured. Eleanor thanked her and took the card. The paper was thick and neatly folded, with handwriting that was clean, formal, and unmistakably masculine. "You are requested to join Lord Ashbourne in the drawing room at 10 o'clock. Not a gesture of affection, not even a warm word. But perhaps, she thought, it was a beginning. She dressed with care, though she chose a simple day gown of soft lavender muslin, with fine pin-tucks at the bodice and a high collar trimmed in lace. Her hair was drawn back in a neat twist, pinned modestly, with only a few loose curls near her ears. Not too formal, not too plain. The drawing room was at the front of the house, overlooking the drive. A fire crackled gently in the grate when she entered, and the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers greeted her. For a moment, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar. Home, or the shape of it. Nathaniel stood near the hearth, dressed not in military formality but a simple waistcoat and open shirt. He looked younger like this, less untouchable. He did not look at her when she entered. "My lord," she said softly. He gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit." She did, smoothing her skirts, folding her hands lightly in her lap. He remained standing, staring into the fire. "I understand last night was unpleasant," he said at last. Eleanor kept her gaze steady. "You might say so." He looked at her then, eyes sharp. Lady Selina's presence was not planned. I did not expect her to arrive, but I saw no reason to send her away. "Of course not," Eleanor said quietly. "That would have been inconvenient." Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, perhaps, or surprise. "I do not appreciate sarcasm. And I do not appreciate being humiliated in my own home," she replied, her voice calm. A beat of silence passed between them. "I was not prepared for this marriage," he said. "Certainly not to a stranger chosen for me while I was at war. Nor was I prepared to be married to a man who clearly believes the worst of me without cause," Eleanor replied. "Yet here we are." His jaw tightened. "I expect nothing from you," he said. "We will maintain appearances when necessary. Beyond that, you are free to do as you like." Eleanor nodded. "Then I shall do what I believe is right." He raised an eyebrow. "Meaning what?" "Meaning I will try to be a good wife, whether you believe I plotted to become one or not." She stood. Her hands were steady now. "Good morning, my lord." She turned and walked toward the door, her head high and her heart aching, but her pride intact. Then, behind her, his voice stopped her. "Wait." She turned back. Nathaniel stepped to a side table and retrieved a small box. Polished wood, plain brass clasp. Nothing ornate. He held it for a moment, as if uncertain. "I meant to send this through the solicitor," he said stiffly, "before your arrival." Eleanor said nothing. He stepped forward and extended the box to her. "I was told it was expected. A wedding band." She took the box slowly, watching his face. "I do not give it as a gesture of affection," he added, voice clipped. "Only as acknowledgement of the fact that we are married," she finished. He gave a tight nod. Eleanor opened the lid. Inside lay a narrow ring of gold. Not new, not glittering, worn smooth at the edges. She suspected it had belonged to someone before her. Perhaps his mother. Perhaps further back. "It isn't much," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "It is more than I expected." She took the ring and with care slid it onto her finger. It fit. Nathaniel said nothing more. She looked down at her hand, now marked by something that felt both like a burden and a claim. Then she looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He only nodded once. And she left him standing there, alone in the quiet morning, with silence hanging between them like a question yet unanswered. Chapter 4. A Quiet Inheritance. The next morning brought pale spring sun and a sky scrubbed clean of rain. The light crept across Eleanor's windows like a promise of calm, though the silence in the corridors still pressed around her like fog. She dressed with care. A soft blue wool gown, suitable for walking, with silver buttons at the cuffs. Her pelisse was dark grey, fur-trimmed and sensible. A bonnet in matching shades framed her face, though she gave little attention to the mirror before descending the stairs. She had no clear plan, only the sense that she must be seen, in the house, on the grounds, somewhere beyond the four walls of her chambers. At the bottom of the staircase, a footman paused and bowed stiffly. "Good morning, my lady." Eleanor returned the greeting with a gentle nod. "I'll be taking some air." He hesitated. "Shall I send for your maid?" "That won't be necessary," she said. "I prefer to walk alone." She passed through the great hall, trailing her fingers lightly over the banister. Portraits of Blackthorne ancestors stared down at her again. The same dark brows, the same thin lips, the same judgment. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet. The gravel drive crunched beneath her boots. She made her way toward the gardens, where winter roses still clung to the hedges, and the last of the leaves spiraled across the paths. She did not expect to see anyone, which is why she stopped short at the sight of a woman in an apron near the stables, brushing down a sleek bay gelding. The woman turned. Her face was flushed from exertion, and she hesitated when she saw Eleanor. "My lady," she said, dipping a quick curtsy. Eleanor smiled. "Good morning. You're with the stables?" "Yes, my lady. My husband John is the groom. I help out with brushing and feed while he's laid up." There was something about her tone. Cautious, deferential, but not unkind. Eleanor stepped a little closer. "He's unwell." The woman nodded. "Took a fall from the hayloft last week. Bruised ribs, but no break. He's been resting in the cottage since. He'll be back on his feet soon enough." "I am sorry to hear it. I hope he recovers quickly." The woman blinked, surprised. "That's very kind of you, my lady." Eleanor glanced at the horse, who tossed his head and pawed the ground. "And that's Titus, Lord Ashbourne's favourite, when he's riding." Eleanor reached out slowly. The horse lowered his head. She smoothed his neck with one gloved hand. "You're very handsome, Titus. Though I doubt you would think much of me in a saddle." The woman laughed, quick and genuine. "Forgive me, my lady. It's just, you're not what I expected." Eleanor looked at her. "No?" "Well, we didn't expect anyone truly. Not a countess. Not so young. We only heard bits and pieces. I imagine the bits were not flattering." The woman flushed. "I didn't mean—" "It's quite all right," Eleanor said gently. "Most people mistrust what they do not understand." The stable door creaked open and a man stepped out. Older, balding, with a crutch under one arm. He paused when he saw Eleanor and gave a shallow nod. "My lady," he said stiffly. "Good afternoon," Eleanor replied gently. He said nothing more, only glanced at his wife before disappearing back into the shadows of the stable. The woman glanced at Eleanor with an apologetic smile. "I should finish with Titus, but if you ever wish to ride, my lady, I'd recommend Daisy. She's gentle as anything and well suited to a careful seat. You'd like her." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." Later that day, in the drawing room, she overheard two maids whispering just outside the door. She spoke to Hannah in the stables, even greeted John. Well, that was thoughtful of her. It was. A quiet pause, then retreating footsteps. Eleanor turned the page of her book without reading it. From the far end of the corridor, Lord Ashbourne watched her through the open doorway. Eleanor sat with a book open in her lap, her gloved hands resting lightly on the pages. She was not reading. Not truly. He could see that even from here. Her gaze was distant, her posture composed but faintly weary, as if she were holding herself together through sheer force of will. He had not expected her to walk the grounds that morning, or to speak to the stable-woman. He had not expected anything, really, because he had not let himself wonder what sort of woman she was. And now here she was, young, still, in his house, and beautiful. That part annoyed him most of all. He had not expected beauty. He had assumed, perhaps hoped, for someone plain, someone easy to disregard. But Eleanor Worthing was not plain, not even close. There was something elegant in the lines of her face, softened by gentleness, not vanity. Her voice had the quiet warmth of someone who did not speak merely to be heard. Her smile, though rare so far, had startled him. It did not ask for approval. It simply existed, as if kindness were something she carried with her, whether or not it was deserved, which only made it worse. Because he did not trust her, not her beauty or her sweet, steady eyes. He had no intention of being played for a fool. Whatever arrangement his family had engineered to secure this match, he would not fall into it. She turned a page, slow and careful, still not reading. Nathaniel stepped away before she could sense his presence. Let her settle in. Let her learn the rhythms of this house and the weight of his silence. Let her try, if she must. But he would not make it easy. Chapter 5. Public Humiliation, Private Hurt. Eleanor came down later than she meant to. Not late enough to cause a stir, but late enough to ensure the house was already moving without her. The corridors were busier now, with maids carrying linens, footmen with trays, the quiet shuffle of a house beginning its day. She passed no one who spoke to her, but some of them nodded. It was something. In the breakfast room, the sideboard had already been laid. A silver rack of toast sat cooling beside a covered dish, its lid slightly askew to reveal a perfectly folded omelette with herbs and cream, still faintly steaming. There were poached eggs in a silver chafing dish, nestled beside plump grilled tomatoes and thin slices of ham, their edges just crisped to golden brown. A cut-glass jar of orange marmalade caught the morning light, gleaming like amber. Fresh rolls, lightly dusted with flour, were arranged in a linen-lined basket near a pot of butter shaped into curls. On a smaller tray, a teapot sat beside a matching cup and saucer, painted with delicate violets. A sugar bowl and tiny silver tongs waited at the ready, though no one else had come to use them. To the side, a plate of fresh fruit had been arranged with care. Pale slices of pear, dark winter grapes, and a perfect quarter of a blood orange, its flesh glistening like a ruby. It was a breakfast laid out for company. But Eleanor sat alone. She spread a bit of marmalade on toast, trying not to think about how little she belonged here. Every detail, the silver, the bone china, the rich scent of freshly polished wood, reminded her she was no one's idea of a proper countess. Her father had been a vicar in a modest parish in Norfolk. She had grown up reading sermons aloud, helping arrange flowers on the altar, learning to sew and to serve tea with quiet hands. She knew scripture by heart and could manage a household ledger, but she had never written a letter in French. Her handwriting was tidy but plain, and she had never kept a diary. Ladies were expected to write clever little notes, sweet poems, elegant invitations. Eleanor, more often than not, had written grocery lists. She was still spreading marmalade when footsteps paused just behind her. "Message for you, my lady." She turned to find a young footman holding a silver tray. On it lay a single envelope, neatly folded and sealed. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the letter. The handwriting was strong and spare. "I will ride at 11 o'clock. You may accompany me if you wish. Highness N. Ashbourne." No greeting, no invitation. Simply a statement of intent. She folded the note with care and set it aside. "Please inform Lord Ashbourne that I will be ready," she said. The footman bowed and withdrew. The stable smelled of leather and hay and the sharp sweetness of fresh oats. Eleanor arrived in a riding habit borrowed from her cousin, which had been taken in the night before by a nimble-fingered maid. The dark green velvet was several seasons out of date, and the grey wool skirt did not quite hang right on her frame. She wore it with as much grace as she could manage, though she felt every inch of the impostor she was. Nathaniel was already mounted when she arrived. His stallion, Titus, stood tall and restless, his black coat gleaming like oil. Nathaniel sat with the easy authority of a man used to command. His coat was perfectly tailored, his gloves immaculate. She curtsied slightly. "Good morning, my lord." He nodded. "The grooms tell me you have been matched with Clover. She's a bit lively but well-mannered once you show her a steady hand." Eleanor hesitated. "Clover?" she asked. "I was told I'd be riding Daisy." Nathaniel, already adjusting the bridle on his own mount, glanced back. "Daisy is safe enough, but she's half asleep on her best day. You seemed comfortable riding." "I am," Eleanor said quickly, and it was mostly true. She had grown up on the back of borrowed farm horses, riding astride over uneven fields with no one watching. But side saddle was another matter entirely, one she had only begun to reacquaint herself with since arriving at Ashbourne. Graceful, composed, elegant, and far less forgiving. Still, she lifted her chin. "I can manage." Nathaniel nodded. "Clover's spirited, but she listens well." The mare danced a little beneath the groom's hand as Eleanor approached. Dapple grey, sleek, with bright eyes and a delicate toss of her head, Clover looked every bit the picture of a fine lady's mount, and just willful enough to keep her rider honest. Eleanor stroked the mare's neck and murmured something low. Then, with the groom's assistance, she mounted. The side saddle still felt unnatural, her balance less instinctive than it once had been. She adjusted, shoulders back, spine tall, knees pressing lightly into position. Not perfect, but passable. Clover shifted under her, testing. "I'm ready," Eleanor said. Nathaniel's gaze lingered, unreadable. Then he turned his horse toward the path, and she followed, one steady breath at a time. The mare was not wild, but she was impatient. Her steps were quick, ears flicking constantly. Eleanor sat tall, doing her best to control her grip and breathe evenly. She could feel Nathaniel's gaze occasionally flick toward her, unreadable. After a while, he spoke. "You were educated at home?" "Yes, my father taught me." "And you handle your own correspondence?" Eleanor blinked. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "No particular reason. You struck me as precise." She did not know if it was a compliment. "I try to be," she said. It was not a lie, exactly. Her letters were plain and careful, not polished. She had never used sealing wax with her own crest, never chosen a paperweight. They rode a little farther, toward a curve in the path that overlooked the lower paddocks, where a pair of stable boys were checking the fencing. One leaned on a post, the other held a spool of rope, both pausing to watch as the horses approached. It happened in a blink. Clover gave a sudden hop sideways, not quite a rear, but a jolt sharp enough to throw Eleanor off balance. Her hands gripped too hard, her seat slipped, and before she could correct, she was falling. Her skirt tangled around her legs. The ground met her hard. The thud of impact stole her breath. She lay still for half a second, trying to collect her wits, aware, painfully, of the stable boys watching. Nathaniel had dismounted by the time she pushed herself up on one elbow. He did not touch her. But he crouched nearby. "You did not tell me you were out of practice," he said, voice quiet. She pressed her lips together, brushing dirt from her glove. "I did not think it mattered." "Of course it matters." He stood, eyes scanning her form as if checking for breaks. She stood too, though her right hip throbbed and her pride even more so. "I am not injured," she said, voice thin. "You could have been," he said. She looked away. "Then I apologize for the inconvenience." Nathaniel said nothing. One of the stable boys approached hesitantly, leading Clover by the reins. The mare seemed calm now. Eleanor took them, her fingers trembling just slightly. "I will walk her back," she said. "Please do not trouble yourself." Nathaniel did not stop her. She walked alone, the reins loose in her hand. The wind pulled at her skirts, and her leg ached where it had struck the ground. Each step made it worse, but she did not limp. By the time she reached the house, her cheeks were cold, her pride hollow. Inside, she handed her gloves to a footman and ascended the stairs without a word. Chapter 6. Bruises, Letters, and Silence. The bathwater had long since cooled, but Eleanor remained still, arms folded against her chest, chin tucked low. A faint ache throbbed in her hip and shoulder, a dull echo of the fall she had pretended did not matter. It mattered. The humiliation had settled over her skin like a second petticoat, impossible to shake. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment again. Her skirts flaring, her hands scrabbling, the hard earth rising to meet her. And the faces of the stable boys, too young to hide their winces. The worst part, perhaps, was Nathaniel's silence. Not cruel, not cold exactly, but impersonal. She had fallen, and he had spoken to her as if she had stumbled over a carpet. Correct, reserved, barely inconvenienced. She stepped from the bath and wrapped herself in a soft robe. Her maid, Margaret, returned a few minutes later to help her dress in a house gown of dusky rose muslin with fine lace at the cuffs. It was one of her few garments that had not belonged to someone else first. Margaret said nothing about the bruises, though Eleanor knew she must have seen the discoloration blooming at her shoulder. Instead, she smoothed Eleanor's hair back into a soft twist and left her with a quiet, "Shall I bring you tea, my lady?" Eleanor declined. She could not bear tea. She sat instead at the writing desk tucked beneath the window. The view overlooked a frost-tipped garden, and beyond that, the gentle dip of the meadow. Her fingers hovered over the little inkwell and the stack of pale cream paper beside it. She thought of writing to Lady Strathmore, or to her cousin Anne. But what could she say? She had been married, by proxy, to a man who did not want her. She had arrived at a house that received her like a polite ghost, and she had been thrown from a horse in front of the help. Hardly the start of a love story. With slow, careful strokes, she dipped her pen into the glass inkwell and began. "My lord." She stared at the paper. The words sat awkwardly on the page. "I regret the inconvenience of this morning and hope you do not think me—" She paused. Weak? Foolish? A burden? She crumpled the paper, set it aside, and reached for another. "Lord Ashbourne, I wanted only to thank you for your consideration." "No." That was false. There had been no warmth, no real kindness. She was not a woman who lied, even in ink. A third sheet joined the others in the waste bin. She laid the pen down and pressed her fingers to her temple. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." "The housekeeper, Mrs. Redley, requests a moment of your time, my lady, if you are available." Beneath the neat lines was a second note, smaller, hastily added. "The maids are asking questions." Eleanor sat a little straighter. When she arrived at the smaller of the sitting rooms, Mrs. Redley was already there. She rose at once, tall, composed, her black gown buttoned to the collar, and gave a curtsy so proper it might have been cut from the pages of a manual. "My lady," she said, "Mrs. Redley, please sit." They took their places across from one another, a tea tray untouched between them. The air felt thick with decorum. "I thought it best to speak directly," the housekeeper began, her tone level. "There's been some murmuring below stairs." Eleanor folded her hands. "Regarding this morning?" "Partly," Mrs. Redley said. "But more than that, the maids are uncertain how you wish things to be done, whether they're to follow my lead as before, or wait for instruction from you. It isn't a question of rank, my lady, only clarity." Eleanor kept her expression calm, though her pulse quickened. Of course. She had arrived without ceremony, no formal announcement, no household meeting. Nathaniel had said almost nothing, and she, wary of overstepping, had said even less. "In an ordinary household," she said carefully, "this wouldn't be a question." Mrs. Redley hesitated. "Ashbourne has not been an ordinary household for some time, my lady." There was no judgment in her tone, only fact. Eleanor looked down briefly, then lifted her chin. "Then let me be clear now. I have no desire to interfere with the systems already in place. I trust your judgment, and I will not undermine it. But I will be involved. I intend to learn what I must, and to be seen doing so." Mrs. Redley nodded slowly. Her expression softened, not to warmth, but to something that resembled approval. "Very good, my lady. I believe that will go some way toward quieting things." Eleanor hesitated, then asked, more quietly, "Has Lord Ashbourne said anything? To the staff, I mean, about me?" The pause was brief, but telling. "No, my lady. Only that you are to be shown every courtesy as Countess of Ashbourne." Eleanor absorbed this with a small nod. That would be enough for now. Courtesy was not affection, but it was something. "Thank you, Mrs. Redley." When the housekeeper had gone, Eleanor remained where she was, her eyes fixed on the cold hearth, her hands still folded in her lap. She had not come to be adored. But she had hoped, in some small way, to be received. Now she knew better. She would have to claim her place. Not with force, but with presence. Steady, visible, undeniable. And she would. A few hours later, Nathaniel Ashbourne sat in his study, the fire casting restless shadows across the floor. He had not stirred the fire. The last log had burned low, and the coals pulsed faintly, red and quiet. A book lay open on his desk, ignored. He had not seen his wife since the ride. Word had reached him, as it always did, that she had returned to her chambers and not emerged. No complaints, no theatrics, only silence. "She is not fragile," he said aloud. The sound of his voice surprised him. But something about the way she had stood, pride stiffening her spine while her hands trembled, stayed with him. He looked back at the fire, but the flame gave no answer. Chapter 7. A Misstep at the Table. The clock in the hall struck 10 as Eleanor descended the great staircase, her hand trailing lightly along the polished banister. The air in the house was cool, still touched with rain, but the windows let in long bars of watery spring light that softened the starkness of the stone floors. She had dressed with care. Her gown was pale lavender silk, a little too simple for someone of her new station, and a little too old to be current, but it fit her well. The bodice hugged her frame without immodesty. Her hair was arranged in a smooth chignon, and she wore a pair of pearl drop earrings she had borrowed from Lady Strathmore's collection. The only new item was a lilac ribbon tied at her waist, stiff from lack of use, but sweet nonetheless. As she reached the base of the stairs, a footman appeared and bowed. "His lordship is in the breakfast room, my lady." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. She followed him down a long corridor lined with portraits. The air smelled faintly of polish and old books. When she entered the room, Nathaniel was already seated, a cup of tea beside him and a plate of half-finished eggs growing cool. He looked up. "Good morning, Lady Ashbourne." "Good morning, my lord." She took her place at the opposite end of the table. The room was elegantly furnished with dark mahogany panels, heavy damask curtains in muted gold, and a long sideboard laid with covered dishes. A maid hovered nearby, waiting for instruction. "Would you like breakfast, my lady?" the girl asked. Eleanor nodded. "Just toast and tea, please." As the maid went to fetch the tray, Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap and tried not to fidget. She had eaten in this room before, but never like this, seated across from her husband, aware of every movement, every pause, and unsure which rules now applied to her. Nathaniel took a sip from his cup, then asked, "Are you feeling improved?" "Yes, thank you," she said. "It was only a light fall." He nodded but said nothing more. A low fire crackled in the hearth, and the silver glinted in the quiet. The maid returned with a small tray, setting it gently in front of Eleanor. Toast with jam, stewed pears, a porcelain cup of black tea with a curl of steam rising from it. She lifted her teacup, only to find that her hand trembled slightly. She steadied it with her other hand. "I am sorry about yesterday," she said suddenly, setting the cup down. "I ought to have told the truth about my riding. I was embarrassed." Nathaniel looked up from his tea. "You are not the first person to exaggerate a skill for the sake of pride." The words were not unkind, but they were not forgiving either. Eleanor gave a small, polite nod. "Still, I regret giving the impression I intended to deceive you." A pause. Then he said, "I believe you." It was not warm, not reassuring, but it was something. A long silence stretched between them. Eleanor turned to her plate, focusing on her toast. The jam was too sweet, but she chewed carefully, willing herself to be calm. She could feel his gaze on her, weighing, assessing, and it made her spine straighten. When she looked up, she noticed a slender man had entered the room, older than Nathaniel, with a neatly trimmed beard and a pair of spectacles perched low on his nose. He carried a leather folio. "My lord," the man said with a slight bow. "Fletcher," Nathaniel replied. "Good. We will review the tenant reports in the study." Fletcher turned to Eleanor and gave a courteous bow. "My lady." Eleanor smiled gently. "Good morning, Mr. Fletcher." He seemed mildly surprised by her acknowledgement but inclined his head again. "A pleasure, my lady." Nathaniel stood. "Enjoy your breakfast." And then he was gone, along with Fletcher, leaving the door to click shut behind them. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realised she was holding. After breakfast, she wandered the hallways, pausing to study the portraits that lined the main corridor. One showed a woman in a high-waisted gown, painted in soft blues and cream. She looked kind. Tired, perhaps. Eleanor wondered if she had felt as out of place in her first days at Ashbourne Hall. Nathaniel sat in his study, the scent of old leather and fresh ink curling softly in the stillness. Fletcher was already flipping through the tenant ledger, murmuring notes about rents and repairs. But Nathaniel's thoughts were elsewhere. She had been polite to Fletcher. He had not expected that. Most women in her position barely acknowledged the steward, but she had greeted him gently, naturally, without pretense. Not elegant, not polished, but composed, and not afraid to apologize. He turned the page. Chapter 8. An Uneasy Truce. Eleanor sat at the writing desk in her chamber, pen poised but unmoving. The paper before her remained blank. The ink in the well gleamed dark and ready, but the words would not come. She had tried 3 drafts already, all abandoned. The phrases felt stiff, artificial, or worse, desperate. What did one write to a cousin who barely knew her, especially when the purpose was not personal, but meant to establish her place? Lady Strathmore had encouraged her to build connections in the county. Eleanor understood the reasoning, but still felt like an imposter pressing herself into rooms she had no business entering. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she said, grateful for the interruption. Her maid, Margaret, stepped inside, holding a small tray. "A note, my lady, from Lord Ashbourne." Eleanor blinked. "From Lord Ashbourne?" Alice nodded, placed the tray on the writing desk, and stepped back. The paper was thick and cream-coloured, the handwriting firm and precise. Eleanor unfolded the note. "Lady Ashbourne, weather permitting, I intend to ride out to inspect the western boundary. You are welcome to accompany me if you wish. Nathaniel, Lord Ashbourne." Her heart gave a small, surprised flutter. It was the first time he had invited her anywhere. There was nothing warm in the words, no sentiment, but still, it was an invitation. She folded the note carefully and placed it beside the blank page. "Please send word to the stables," she said to Margaret. "Let them know I will ride after breakfast." Margaret curtsied. "Yes, my lady." The morning sky was still grey, but the rain had paused, leaving behind a cool mist and dew-bright hedges. Eleanor arrived at the stables just as Nathaniel was tightening the girth on his own mount. He glanced over, surprised but unreadable. "You received my note?" "I did," she said, lifting her chin slightly. A stable hand approached her, leading a calm, well-mannered bay. She reached for the reins, but Nathaniel's voice cut in before she could take them. "Not that one. Give her Daisy." The stable hand blinked, then nodded quickly and turned back toward the stalls. Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. "Daisy." "She's steadier and older," he said. "I prefer not to have you thrown again." It wasn't tender, but it wasn't indifferent. She gave a small nod and said nothing more. The groom led out a plump, dapple-grey mare with soft eyes and a gentle gait. Eleanor mounted with care, her muscles still sore from the fall. Daisy stood calmly beneath her, warm and solid, and Eleanor felt her shoulders ease. They rode in silence at first, following the edge of a wide pasture lined with budding hawthorns. The damp grass muffled the sound of their horses' hooves. Birds rustled in the hedges, and somewhere in the distance, sheep called to each other on the hillside. Eleanor breathed deeply. The quiet between them felt different today, less hostile, not welcoming exactly, but at least neutral. He spoke first. "You ride more confidently this time." "I was given a steadier horse," she replied, then added, "and I kept both feet in the stirrups." Nathaniel gave a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. They crested a small rise. Beyond it, the land sloped downward in orderly fields, bordered by stone walls and hedgerows, all pale with the first touches of spring green. "This part of the estate was leased to a tenant who recently passed," Nathaniel said. "I'll need to decide whether to offer it to his son or divide it between neighbours." Eleanor listened carefully, though she wasn't sure whether to offer an opinion. When he glanced at her, as if expecting one, she said gently, "If the son is honest and capable, it might be kind to let him prove himself." Nathaniel didn't reply immediately, but after a pause, he said, "He has a reputation for drink. I'll need to speak with Fletcher." They rode a little farther, then turned toward the woods that bordered the western edge of the property. The wind lifted Eleanor's veil slightly, and she pressed it down with one hand. A few minutes later, Nathaniel slowed his horse and nodded toward a small clearing. "We'll pause here." She dismounted carefully, her muscles already tired. Nathaniel tethered both horses, then leaned against a low tree branch, his gaze sweeping the horizon. Eleanor glanced toward the trees. The air was damp with pine and earth. She felt braver now, standing beside him rather than across from him at a cold dining table. "I've begun a letter to my cousin," she said after a while. "Lady Strathmore encouraged me to make connections in the area." He nodded, arms folded. "That is sensible." "I am not a gifted letter writer," she admitted, "but I'm trying." He said nothing, but she caught the faintest softening in his profile. They stood quietly together for another minute. Then he pushed off from the branch and said, "Let's ride back." By late afternoon, Eleanor returned to her chamber, cheeks pink from wind and exertion, her skirts damp from riding. She asked Margaret to help her change and then returned to her desk. She picked up her pen and, without hesitation this time, began to write. Chapter 9. The Comment. The letter arrived just after breakfast. Alice placed it on Eleanor's writing desk with her usual quiet efficiency, then withdrew. The envelope bore Lady Strathmore's familiar looping hand and was sealed with her personal crest, a lion in profile, fierce and dignified. Eleanor broke the seal with a mix of hope and wariness. "My dearest Eleanor, I trust this letter finds you well settled in your new position as Lady Ashbourne. I had hoped for more news from you, but I understand how much you must be adjusting. Marriage brings subtle trials, especially when affection is not immediate. But let me reassure you, no man is won by sweetness alone. The key is presence. Be seen, my dear. Look the part. Speak with purpose. You are a countess now. The staff should feel your authority, and the local ladies should sense your rank without needing to be told. As for Lord Ashbourne, men are slower to trust than we are. But give him reason to be proud of you in public, and the rest will follow. Yours, Strathmore." Eleanor set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. There was no malice in the words, but they made her feel small all the same, like a child fumbling through an adult's role. She had no fine gowns of her own, no jewels, no crest. She hadn't even met the village ladies yet, and the housekeeper still addressed her as if she were a guest. She knew she didn't look like a countess. Not really. When Nathaniel informed her, over tea, that he would be going into the village that morning to speak with the solicitor and check on the market accounts, she asked, quietly, if she might accompany him. He didn't question the request. "Very well," he said, folding his napkin. "We leave in half an hour." Farley village was small and neat, its roads still damp from last night's rain. Smoke curled from chimney pots, and shop windows gleamed with early spring wares, seed packets, bolts of gingham, and ribbons in pale seasonal colours. Eleanor had not expected to be stared at, but as she stepped down from the carriage beside Nathaniel, heads did turn. A pair of young women whispered behind their gloved hands. A butcher came to his doorway and gave a short, respectful nod. Nathaniel exchanged a few quiet words with a man near the square, then turned to her. "I'll be at the solicitor's," he said. "Have a look through the shops if you like. I won't be long." She nodded and walked slowly along the street, her gloved hands folded at her waist. The shop fronts were tidy, a bookseller, a bakery, a dressmaker's. She paused at the latter, drawn by the soft colours in the window. A gown of pale blue muslin was displayed alongside a spring bonnet with silk ribbon. Inside, two women stood near the counter, their voices low but not careful enough. That's her, the new Lady Ashbourne. Poor thing looks as if she borrowed her gown from a housemaid. A pause, then a soft, knowing laugh. Eleanor went still. Her spine stiffened, her breath caught. And then, just behind her, came the quiet sound of boots on wet stone. She turned. Nathaniel stood a few steps away. He must have come from the solicitors and seen the whole thing, or heard it. His expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on her face, not the window. He said only, "The carriage is ready." She gave a small nod, throat tight, and followed him without a word. They rode back in silence. Eleanor sat straight, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes on the blurred green fields beyond the window. Nathaniel didn't speak. He didn't look at her, but his jaw was set and his gloved fingers flexed once on his knee. In her chamber, Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time. Lady Strathmore's words echoed again. Be seen, look the part, give him reason to be proud of you in public. Her reflection in the glass did not look like a countess. And now, someone else had said so. She turned from the mirror and sat down at her writing desk. Then she rang for Margaret. Chapter 10. Fault Lines. The next morning, Eleanor lingered over her tea longer than usual. She told herself she was waiting for Margaret to finish her stitching, or for the rain to ease, or for a reason to feel like she belonged in the fine blue morning room where portraits of strangers watched her from gilded frames. She was not avoiding Nathaniel. Not precisely. But she had not slept well. The words she'd overheard in the village repeated themselves in her mind, sharper now in the quiet morning. Poor thing looks as if she borrowed her gown from a housemaid. It wasn't just the remark. It was how easily it had been said, how quickly it had been believed. Her wardrobe had always been modest. As the daughter of a country vicar, Eleanor had grown up with thrift stitched into every seam. Her gowns were clean, well-mended and serviceable, but they lacked the quiet luxury of silk, the dignified weight of velvet, the fresh crispness of new linen. Even her gloves, though scrubbed and pressed, had begun to wear thin at the fingertips. She had been meticulous, careful in every choice. But care, she was learning, was not the same as elegance. She turned that thought over again as she entered the breakfast room. Nathaniel was already seated, a ledger open beside his untouched plate. "Good morning," she said, steadying her voice. He looked up, nodded once. "Good morning." Silence settled between them as she took her seat. Her tea was poured. Eggs were offered. He returned to his figures, and she to her thoughts. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "About yesterday." He looked up again, his expression unreadable. "I hope I did not embarrass you," she said. Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her face, his dark eyes cool but searching. "You did not," he said. "They embarrassed themselves." Eleanor looked down, her throat tightening. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness. It's fact." She didn't answer. Not right away. "I am trying," she said finally, her voice low. "I know I'm not what anyone expected." Nathaniel did not reply, not directly, but after a long moment he closed the ledger and pushed it aside. "You need not prove anything," he said. "Not to me." Later, in his study, Fletcher waited until the accounts were finished before clearing his throat. "If I may, my lord, a word about Lady Ashbourne." Nathaniel didn't look up. "Go on." "The staff is uncertain how to proceed with her." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "She's polite, considerate, nothing amiss. But she hasn't yet taken an active role in the household. The younger maids still go to Mrs. Redley for instruction, and Cook mentioned she hasn't asked to review the household accounts or menus." "And?" Fletcher folded his hands behind his back. There's no confusion about rank, sir. Only about intention. The staff doesn't know whether she means to oversee things directly, or if she prefers to leave it to Mrs. Redley. And without direction, they hesitate. And what do you suggest? Something visible. Something that signals her authority and your support. A small gesture might do more than a speech. A pause stretched. Then Nathaniel said quietly, Miss Talbot still offers discreet delivery. Fletcher gave the ghost of a smile. She does, my lord. That afternoon, Eleanor found a small box waiting in her chamber. It was unmarked, save for a folded card. A suggestion, not a statement. N. Inside, nestled in tissue, was a length of soft ivory ribbon and a pair of gloves. Not overly fine, but new and well made. Gloves that would not raise an eyebrow. Ribbon that might brighten a modest gown without pretending to be more than it was. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed and turned the gloves over in her hands. He had said she wasn't a burden, that she didn't need to prove herself. And now this. Not pity, not indulgence, just thoughtfulness. A quiet gesture, from a man who spoke little but noticed more than he let on. She didn't know what to make of it. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. That evening, dinner was served in the formal dining room. The table stretched long and empty between them, its dark, polished wood gleaming under the candlelight. 2 footmen stood in still silence near the walls. A low fire crackled in the hearth, but the room still felt cool. The first course was brought in with ceremony, a velvety white soup, faintly scented with leek and cream, served in porcelain bowls edged with gold. Eleanor thanked the footman softly and sipped, grateful for the warmth, even if her appetite was uncertain. Nathaniel spoke no greeting, nor offered any toast. His gaze was distant, fixed briefly on his bowl, then the fire. The next course followed. Slices of roast duck, seared crisp at the edge, accompanied by glazed carrots and a delicately layered potato tart. The aroma filled the air, rich and savoury. Eleanor cut her portion carefully, her knife silent against the porcelain. She could feel Nathaniel watching her, not rudely, but with the faint intensity of a man studying something he did not yet understand. She tried. "Did you ride this morning?" "No," he said, "too wet underfoot." Another pause. She tried again. Fletcher mentioned a tenant dispute at Langford Hill. Nathaniel gave a nod. Resolved. Nothing more. Dessert arrived in quiet splendour, a moulded jelly of blood orange and rosewater, shimmering slightly in its glass dish, served beside a silver bowl of preserved cherries. Eleanor touched her spoon to the jelly, but did not taste it. At last, Nathaniel spoke again. The gloves suited. She looked up, startled. "Pardon?" He did not meet her eyes. "They suited you." "Oh," she said quietly. "Thank you." Silence followed, stretched thin and formal. Not quite awkward, but far from warm. It was the kind of silence that required good breeding to tolerate. Eleanor did her best. When the final course was cleared, Nathaniel stood, offered her a polite bow, and excused himself without another word. Eleanor remained at the table a moment longer, staring into the flickering light. She had thanked him for the gloves, but he had not said why he sent them. Chapter 11. The Tea at Greystone. Eleanor had not expected an invitation, not this soon, and certainly not to tea. The card had arrived that morning, presented on a silver tray with the same practised precision that governed all things at Ashbourne. Lady Eliza Godfrey requests the pleasure of Lady Ashbourne's company for tea at Greystone Lodge, Thursday next, at 3 o'clock. It was not a grand invitation, but it was a signal. She was being noticed. Fletcher had nodded at the name. The Godfreys have long standing in the county. Old family, well connected. Lady Eliza is known to take a firm hand in local matters. The quiet of her chamber suited Eleanor as Margaret helped her dress. No unnecessary conversation, only a gentle touch and the occasional adjustment of a pin or ribbon. She chose the grey wool, the one with the pearl buttons. Modest, but proper. Not new, but it had always made her feel a little more composed. She checked her hem twice before stepping into the carriage. Greystone Lodge was smaller than Ashbourne Hall, but handsomely kept. The gravel drive was lined with early crocuses, and the windows gleamed despite the overcast sky. It had the look of a home long lived in and well tended, a place with strong tea and stronger opinions. The butler opened the door with a nod, and within moments, Eleanor found herself in a drawing room full of women she did not know. 5 in total, all seated in the gentlest curve of armchairs and settees near the fire. They turned as she entered, and for a beat, silence hung in the air. Then they rose, not warmly, but dutifully. "Lady Ashbourne," said the hostess, Lady Godfrey, gesturing vaguely to the others. "So pleased you could join us. I believe you've met no one here before?" "No, ma'am," Eleanor said with a slight curtsy, "only by name." The ladies murmured polite greetings as Eleanor was guided to a seat at the edge of the circle. She could feel the glance one of them exchanged with another, a flicker of amusement quickly masked. The tea table was already laid. Delicate rose-patterned china, a silver sugar bowl, cakes with glossy icing, and tea sandwiches arranged as precisely as lacework. It was all very beautiful, very formal. Conversation resumed almost immediately, but it flowed around Eleanor rather than toward her. There was mention of Lady Kendale's dreadful rash, the death of a footman in Leamington, and someone's niece who had married an Italian and was now paying the price, whatever that meant. "She'll have to learn how to boil her own water," one lady said with a soft laugh. "Foreign households aren't so forgiving." "Oh, and Lady Ashbourne," added the same woman, as though remembering. "What a charming ribbon. So simple. Very fresh." Eleanor smiled and thanked her, though she felt her cheeks warm. She was glad, at least, to be wearing her new gloves. "Indeed," said another, with a pointed smile. "It takes a certain bearing to wear simplicity well." Eleanor inclined her head. "I find it suits me better than excess." A few brows lifted. One woman adjusted her teacup. No one replied. She tried to follow the conversation, tried to offer a comment here or there, but the rhythm never slowed for her. One lady interrupted before she could finish her sentence. Another ignored her entirely. She had known this might happen. She had prepared herself for it. But it still caught in her throat. She was lifting her teacup when a voice beside her said gently, "Lemon or cream?" Eleanor turned. A woman in her 40s offered her a fresh cup. She was plainly but elegantly dressed in soft navy blue, her brown hair streaked with silver and drawn into a neat chignon. Her expression was calm, her eyes thoughtful. "Lemon, please," Eleanor said. The woman smiled and handed her the cup. "I find cream dulls the flavour." She took a seat beside her, though no one had offered. "I am Lady Clara Langford. I believe we are neighbours of a sort." Eleanor returned the smile, tentative but grateful. "Lady Ashbourne." "Eleanor." Lady Langford's presence shifted something. She asked no leading questions, only spoke of her own estate, a modest place near the river, and how early the roses had come into bloom this year. Her voice was warm and low, her words carefully chosen not to impress, but to invite. "I don't often attend these things," she admitted softly. "But one hears of new arrivals, especially when they come to Ashbourne." "You've come at a difficult time of year," she added. "Too late for the frost, too early for the picnics." "I'm still finding my place," Eleanor said. Lady Langford gave a small, knowing nod. "Most of us are. Some simply pretend better. It was the first time Eleanor had laughed in days. Quiet, but real. When tea ended, the hostess offered her a bland farewell and a vague promise of future calls. The other ladies gathered their gloves and shawls with practiced indifference. Only Lady Langford touched her hand gently as they parted. "I often walk near the river in the mornings," she said, "if you should ever feel like joining me." "I should like that," Eleanor said. In the carriage on the way back to Ashbourne, Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap. The sky was beginning to clear. Pale sun broke through the clouds, lighting the fields in patches. She had not been welcomed, not exactly, but someone had noticed her. Not her gown or her title. Her, and that, for now, was enough. Chapter 12. Talbot's Dressmaking and Repairs. The morning after the tea at Greystone dawned damp and silver-grey, with a low mist clinging to the hedgerows. Eleanor stood by the window of her sitting room, her hand resting lightly on the velvet curtain. Beyond the drive, the trees bowed gently in the breeze, and the road toward the village wound like a ribbon through the fields, pale with dew. She did not wish to sit idle. Not today. She turned as Margaret entered, her arms full of linens. "Would it be possible to have the carriage brought round?" Eleanor asked. Margaret paused, surprised. "Certainly, my lady." "And where shall I say you're bound, my lady?" "To the village," Eleanor replied. "There is a dressmaker's shop I noticed when we passed through." Margaret set down the linens and curtsied. "I'll inform the stables at once. Shall I accompany you?" "Yes," Eleanor said after a breath. "I'd like that." She had not purchased new clothing since the wedding. Her trousseau had been modest, neat and suitable for a vicar's daughter, but never intended for the role of countess. The new gloves gifted by Nathaniel were her only true luxury, and even they had arrived quietly, without acknowledgement. That thought lingered as she crossed the corridor to find him. Nathaniel was in the library, seated behind a broad oak desk. He looked up when she entered, but did not rise. "My lord," she said gently, "I hoped to ask a small favour, or rather, your opinion." He set down his pen. "Go on." "I thought I might visit the dressmaker in the village, only for a few things more suited to my station and Warwickshire's weather." She felt foolish for asking, but he only nodded once, evenly. "You owe me no explanation," he said after a moment. "But I appreciate the courtesy." Eleanor dipped her head. "Thank you." His gaze lingered for a breath. "If her work is sound, you might think of having a riding habit made too." That startled a small smile from her. "Yes," she said. "I think I might." Ashbourne village was quiet, but not empty. A few market stalls lined the high street, offering root vegetables and early greens. The windows of the baker's shop were misted with heat, and children dashed across the green, trailing laughter in their wake. Margaret helped her down from the carriage, and the two had just begun walking when a familiar voice called out, "Lady Ashbourne!" Eleanor turned to find Lady Langford approaching with brisk steps and a pug tucked neatly into her arms. "Lady Langford," Eleanor said, pleased. "How lovely to see you again." "I was on my way to the post, but your arrival is far more diverting. Out on errands?" "I thought to stop at the dressmaker's," Eleanor replied. "Talbot's!" "Excellent. I'll walk with you. Marigold insists on fresh air." She nodded to the dog, who blinked once, unimpressed. Eleanor glanced at Margaret, who gave a faint smile and stepped politely behind. Talbot's Dressmaking and Repairs sat tucked between the baker and the greengrocer. Its painted sign was simple but elegant, and the window displayed a muslin gown on a dress form, pale blue with delicate embroidery at the cuffs. Inside, the shop smelled of lavender and beeswax. Bolts of fabric stood stacked near the wall, and ribbons in pale shades hung like banners from pegs. A half-finished gown stood pinned at the shoulder, awaiting attention. A young woman stepped out from behind a screen, her gown modest, her expression surprised. "Oh, Lady Ashbourne. And Lady Langford. Forgive me. I wasn't expecting." "There is nothing to forgive," Eleanor said gently. "I was hoping you might have something ready-made. Or nearly so." The girl curtsied quickly. "Of course. I'm Miss Talbot. It's just me now since my apprentice left for Coventry, but I'll do my best to help." "We are looking for a few practical pieces," Lady Langford added. "Something well-made and suitable for walking or morning calls. Nothing fussy." "Of course, my lady." Eleanor moved slowly through the shop as Miss Talbot unrolled samples of lawn, muslin and soft cotton. Margaret watched quietly from a corner, and Marigold settled into a cushioned stool by the hearth. "I don't want anything too fine," Eleanor said quietly. "Just something that suits. Something proper." Miss Talbot offered a sympathetic smile. "Of course." Lady Langford raised an eyebrow. "You will be noticed either way, Eleanor. Best to be noticed for something you chose." In the end, Eleanor settled on a dove grey muslin and a soft rose-coloured lawn. One dress would be trimmed in white ribbon, the other in navy, with discreet tucks at the hem and sleeves. "2 walking dresses," she said. "And if you are willing, a riding habit too." "Steady and sensible," Lady Langford murmured. "Not something that makes her look as though she is galloping after scandal." Miss Talbot laughed softly. "I can promise that, my lady." Measurements were taken with soft precision. Eleanor stood still as the tape was laid across her shoulders and along her spine, her breath catching only slightly when it brushed her waist. She had never had a gown made just for her. As they prepared to leave, Miss Talbot helped her into her coat. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Truly." "It is an honour," the girl replied, a little breathless. "We've not dressed a countess before." Outside, the mist had begun to lift. The village looked brighter than it had that morning, and the wind tugged at the edge of Eleanor's coat. 2 women passed on the pavement. One gave a hesitant nod. The other murmured, "Good morning, my lady." Eleanor returned the greeting without pause. Lady Langford smiled. "They will come around. Appear in public a few more times with a respectable pug, and you will be welcome everywhere from Warwick to Westminster." Eleanor laughed. In the window of the next shop she caught her reflection. Composed, steady, a flush in her cheeks from more than just the wind. She was not elegant yet. But she had chosen this moment, and she was no longer invisible, and she was no longer alone. Chapter 13. A Morning Walk. The morning after the village visit dawned cool and pale. Mist clung to the edges of the fields, but streaks of soft blue were breaking through. The air smelled of wet stone, earth and ivy. Spring, not yet arrived, but on its way. Eleanor stood at the glass-pane doors that opened onto the garden, shawl drawn over her shoulders. On the side table, her bonnet lay neatly arranged, set out by Margaret, who had anticipated the walk before Eleanor had said a word. She had begun to anticipate these walks, quiet in step and steady in spirit, as dependable as ever. They stepped outside into a hush so complete it felt almost reverent. The wind moved slowly across the lawn, brushing through the hedges and tall yews that lined the gravel walk. Beds of lavender lay dormant, but crocus tips were beginning to nudge through the soil, shy and bright. Eleanor walked slowly, taking in the detail of it all. She had walked the same paths a dozen times now, but each morning they felt a little different. A little more hers. Ashbourne Hall was still not home, but it was beginning to feel like a place she might learn to inhabit. Margaret had followed a few paces behind, respectful, but not distant. She was easy company, uncritical. She did not fill silence with needless chatter, nor did she hover. Eleanor was grateful for her presence, even if she could not always say so aloud. They passed a robin darting across the path and paused to watch it disappear into a hedge. The trees above them stretched bare and black against the sky, their tips just beginning to bud. The wind carried the faint scent of earth and moss and stone. Eleanor breathed it in. She had not known what she expected when she came to Ashbourne. She had feared disdain. She had feared being ignored. But somehow, in the wake of all that, it was something gentler that had begun to settle around her. Not comfort, not yet, but something like hope. They rounded the corner toward the fountain. The stone bowl was empty now, its surface moss-lined and cracked at the base. Ivy clung to one side like a forgotten sleeve. Eleanor paused by it, then turned her head at the sound of boots on gravel. Nathaniel. The name rose in her mind before she could help it. He stood at the far end of the path, hands clasped behind his back, dark hair neatly combed, and his shoulders straight beneath a tailored coat. He was not in riding clothes today, but dressed for business or study. He looked like a man with a full day ahead, not one who had wandered out for idle conversation. But still, he paused. "You are up early, Lady Ashbourne." "So are you," she said, more softly than she intended. A hint of something passed through his eyes. He stepped forward. "How was the village?" "Pleasant," she said. "Lady Langford met me and was kind enough to accompany me. We stopped by the dressmakers." "I see." His gaze drifted, not rudely but with subtle curiosity. It lingered on her gloves. Not her face, not her bonnet, not her manner, but the fit of the kid leather stretched across her fingers. "You'll be sending away for things, of course," he added, "but Talbot's work is respectable." "I thought so," Eleanor said. She listened. She asked questions. She made me feel as though I wasn't entirely out of place. Nathaniel's expression shifted, just slightly. Something flickered in his eyes. Not amusement, not warmth exactly, but something that was neither cold nor critical. It vanished as quickly as it came. "And was that important to you?" he asked. Eleanor met his gaze. "Yes, very." For a moment, it was quiet. Only the wind in the hedges and the rustle of Margaret in skirts behind them. The path stretched on ahead, narrow and shadowed by a row of trimmed boxwoods. Nathaniel looked at her again. This time, his eyes stayed. She felt it. That sudden, acute awareness of being seen. Not judged, not dismissed, simply noticed. "I'm glad you found what you needed," he said. "Thank you," she replied. She wanted to say more, that she was trying, that she wanted to deserve the name he had given her, not just carry it. But her throat caught, and the words dissolved. Nathaniel inclined his head. "Enjoy your walk," she curtsied. "And your day." He turned and walked back toward the hall, his steps sure and steady on the path. He did not glance back. Eleanor watched him go, her heart strangely full, though she could not say with what. After a moment, she turned back to the fountain. The ivy fluttered in the breeze. The wind was shifting. Beside her, Margaret remained silent. But she slowed her pace slightly on the return, giving Eleanor a moment more to think and breathe and remember the feel of being looked at without suspicion. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel's study. Nathaniel sat alone at his desk, one hand resting on the edge of the open ledger, but his eyes were unfocused. She had looked different this morning, not simply because of the gloves, though they had caught his attention, nor the way her coat fit better than before. It was something quieter. Self-possession. He had expected awkwardness or self-consciousness. But she had moved through the garden with a kind of poised stillness that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. And yes, she was beautiful. He was not blind to that. She had always been pretty in that delicate, fine-boned way some women were. But today, something had shifted. The softness of her mouth, the colour in her cheeks, the way her eyes lifted to meet his without flinching. All of it had lingered longer in his memory than it should have. There was a naturalness to her. No affectation, no artifice. And perhaps that was what troubled him most. He had been trained to look for motives, for ambition, charm, calculation. But there had been none of that in her face. Just warmth, and the faintest touch of hope. He closed the ledger and stood. Crossing to the window, he looked out over the eastern gardens, the neat hedge lines leading down toward the village road. He could not afford to be distracted, not by grace, not by sincerity, not even by beauty, especially not by beauty. Eleanor's chambers, late afternoon. A knock sounded at the chamber door. Margaret went to answer it and returned moments later, carrying a wide, ribbon-wrapped box. A folded note was tucked neatly beneath the silk bow. Eleanor blinked. "What is that?" "A delivery, my lady," said Margaret, "from the dressmaker." "But I didn't order anything ready-made." Margaret offered her the note. Eleanor opened it slowly. "Dearest Lady Ashbourne, I took the liberty of arranging something I thought you ought to have. It is a gown for evenings, and for stepping fully into the light. I trust it will suit you when the moment feels right. Lady Langford." Eleanor opened the box. Inside, tissue paper folded like petals revealed a gown that quite took her breath away. Ivory silk muslin, trimmed in champagne ribbon so pale it was nearly silver gathered delicately at the waist and neckline. The bodice was soft and sculpted, meant to flatter without shouting. The sleeves were short and sheer, with a hint of shimmer beneath candlelight. It was not immodest, but it was bold, not a gown made for blending in. She reached out and touched it. Soft, cool, beautiful. Her pulse fluttered as her fingers lingered over the fabric. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow she would wear it. Margaret said nothing, but her smile said everything. Chapter 14. When she was seen. The dining room was already lit when Eleanor entered. Candles burned low and steady, their light warming the long table and the pale walls beyond. The fire crackled softly, the sound restrained and companionable. Nathaniel looked up, expecting restraint, practicality, something quietly appropriate. What met him instead was light and movement. Silk. Ivory. He stood before he thought to, an instinct rather than a courtesy. The gown did not shout. It did not cling or boast, and yet it transformed her. Not into someone different, not into a lady of fashion or title, but into herself, more fully realized than he had yet allowed himself to see. She looked luminous. Not merely beautiful, but composed in a way that struck him. There was no artifice in it, only stillness, poise, a quiet kind of courage. And suddenly he felt underdressed, unsteady, as though she had arrived as something he had not prepared for, and he did not know the rules anymore. She paused by the table, the candlelight catching in her hair. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm, though her pulse had begun to flutter. He nodded and then, as if remembering, stepped back from the chair. "Good evening, Lady Ashbourne." His eyes lingered. He did not seem aware of it, and that made it more unsettling than scrutiny ever could have been. The ivory silk caught the candlelight as she moved, the soft sheen outlining her figure without excess. The gown did not announce her. It revealed her. "You look changed," he said, the word not quite enough. She inclined her head. "I hope that is not unwelcome." "No," he replied, after the briefest hesitation. "It is not." They took their seats. The soup was pale gold in colour, velvety and smooth, with a delicate perfume of leeks and cream. A thin curl of steam rose from the rim of the porcelain bowl, carrying with it the faint scent of thyme and white pepper. Eleanor stirred her spoon once, then tasted. It was warm, mild, and comforting. Not grand, but thoughtfully made. The sort of dish one did not expect to remember, yet somehow did. "You seem more at ease," Nathaniel said finally, "than when you first arrived." "I am learning," Eleanor replied. "The house, the expectations, myself." His gaze lifted again, thoughtful now, rather than guarded. "I had not considered how much would be required of you," he admitted, "to step into a life already shaped." She met his eyes. "I do not expect it to change for me, only to make room." Something in his expression softened. It was fleeting, but real. The main course arrived beneath silver domes that lifted with quiet ceremony. Slices of pink roasted lamb, seared at the edge and resting in a pool of rosemary-infused gravy, were arranged beside crisped potatoes, golden and flecked with sea salt. Spring carrots, butter-glazed and sweet, gleamed like little embers on the plate. The scent was rich, layered, and faintly wild, like something coaxed in from the fields rather than conjured in a kitchen. Nathaniel took a bite without comment. Eleanor, slower, let the flavours settle on her tongue, savoury, tender, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. "I had imagined it differently," she said, not quite looking at him. "Imagined what?" "This place, this life, you." His fork paused for a moment above the plate, but he did not speak. "I didn't expect to fall in love with a house," she continued, her voice quieter. "But I think I'm beginning to. Or perhaps, with the idea of belonging." He looked at her then. Not with surprise, but with attention. Real, focused, unsettling in its honesty. "Belonging," he repeated. "That is not something I have ever been able to give." "I don't want it handed to me," she said. "I only want the chance to earn it." A silence fell then, neither awkward nor cold. It hummed between them, alive with all the things not said. The final course was a simple stewed pear, poached until translucent and nestled in a shallow dish of spiced wine syrup. A thin curl of orange peel lay beside it, and the scent of cinnamon lingered faintly in the air. The fruit gave easily beneath the spoon, soft but not overripe, the flavour bright and unexpected. Eleanor took a bite and paused, surprised by the warmth it left behind. As the meal drew to a close, Nathaniel looked up. "May I walk you to the drawing room?" he asked. Her breath caught. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." They rose. He did not offer his arm, and she did not expect it. But their footsteps matched as they left the dining room, the hem of her gown whispering softly against the parquet floors. A servant opened the door, bowed, and shut it behind them. In the drawing room, the fire was still low. The same golden hush lingered. Nathaniel crossed to the hearth, adjusting a log with the poker. Sparks jumped, the flames revived. Eleanor stood near the window, her fingers trailing the curtain cord. She turned as he stepped back from the fire. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You've shown more grace than I've had any right to expect." "Then perhaps," she said, "we might begin again." His eyes met hers. "Yes," he said, "we might." She offered a slight curtsy, the motion quiet and instinctive, then slipped from the room. The door clicked shut behind her. Nathaniel remained where he stood. The fire crackled softly behind him, filling the silence she had left. He reached for the decanter on the side table, poured a measure of brandy and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through his chest, dulling nothing. He had no words for what he'd felt that evening. He had seen beauty before. He had known admiration, desire, even affection. But this was something else. Not just how she looked, though that had startled him more than he liked to admit. It was her self-possession. The quiet strength in how she wore that gown, how she carried herself, how she met his gaze, and never once looked away. He had been wrong about her, not just in the surface ways, fundamentally. She was not what his mother had sent. She was not a pawn, or a social climber, or an ornament to be endured. She was, impossibly, something better, and he did not know what to do with that. He finished the brandy and set the glass aside. The fire had begun to settle again, its edges dulling to amber. He should go upstairs. He should return to his study. He should think of something practical. Instead, he stood there, staring into the quiet, the faint echo of her voice still somewhere in the room. He would not forget how she looked tonight. He was not sure he wanted to. Chapter 15. Beneath the Apple Trees. The orchard lay beyond the east garden, tucked behind a row of clipped hornbeams and a crumbling brick wall nearly overtaken by ivy. Eleanor had passed it before, glimpsed from the carriage window, but had never stepped inside. Not until now. The morning was pale and windless, the sky streaked with high, thin clouds. Eleanor walked beside Mr. Jessup, the gardener, a quiet man in his later years, with weather-creased cheeks and a careful way of speaking. "The trees will need pruning soon, my lady," he said, voice low and respectful. "Some of the older ones, the russets especially, they've been left too long." Eleanor looked up at the nearest bough, its dark branches tipped with swollen buds. Moss clung thick along the bark, soft and velvet-like in the morning light. "How many trees are there altogether?" she asked. 34, 2 rows of pears at the south end and a few plums, but apples mostly, some over 100 years old. They'd bear better with proper tending. "And no one's asked you to do that?" Jessup shrugged. "His lordship's been occupied, and the hall's been quiet these past years. No one wanted apples much." "I think I do," Eleanor said softly. He glanced at her, curious, as if unsure whether she meant the fruit or something else. The ground was damp from the rain, scattered with old windfall, wrinkled, weather-browned fruit half sunk into moss, remnants of last year's labour left to rot. But the branches were stirring. Even in stillness she could feel it. The orchard had not been lost, only forgotten. "What would you need?" she asked. He looked at her, surprised. "Tools, mostly. Time. And someone to mind the ladders." "Would you show me how?" Jessup chuckled, not unkindly. "I imagine I could." They walked on, and he pointed out what she wouldn't have noticed, where the soil pooled in spring, which trees bore sweeter fruit, the names of each variety: Ribston, Blenheim orange, Norfolk beefing. "My father planted that one," he said, gesturing toward a crooked tree with a wide base and silvered bark. "No good for eating, but makes a fair cider." "You've been here a long time?" "Since I was a boy. My father before me. We've all worked these trees one way or another." "And do you love them?" He paused. "I think so. They've never asked more than care and patience." Eleanor nodded. That was more than could be said for many people. At the far end of the orchard, she stopped beside a stone bench, half covered in lichen. She brushed it off with her glove, then hesitated. Jessup stepped forward silently and offered his handkerchief. She smiled, accepted it, and wiped the rest away. "Will you excuse me a moment?" "Of course, my lady. I'll check the gate near the brook." He disappeared down the path, boots soft against the damp earth. Eleanor sat, drawing her shawl close. It was quiet here, not silent, but hushed. Birdsong, the whisper of branches. A squirrel darted from one limb to another, heedless of its audience. She looked out over the orchard, row after row of bare-limbed trees, their buds beginning to swell. It reminded her of something in herself she had only just begun to name. This was what she had come for. Not the dress, not the title, not even the house. She wanted to belong to something that could grow. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a low voice said, "You found one of the oldest parts of Ashbourne." Nathaniel. She turned. He stood a few paces behind her, gloved hands clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable, though not unkind. "I asked Mr. Jessup to show me the orchard," she said. "It seemed overlooked." "It has been." He stepped forward, then paused. His gaze moved over the bench, the trees, the quiet curve of her shoulders. A breath passed between them, long and unspoken. "Most of this was my grandfather's doing. He planted the newer trees himself. Every spring, he'd walk the rows with a cane in one hand and a notebook in the other, muttering about soil and grafting techniques. The staff used to call it his second library. Did you ever walk with him?" "Once or twice. I was too young to be of any real help. But I remember he didn't like to be interrupted when the trees were blooming." Eleanor glanced up. The buds were still closed, but nearly ready. A week more, perhaps 2, and the branches would burst with blossom. "They're not quite ready," she said. "No, but they will be." He said it like it mattered. She looked at him. "Is it strange, watching something wake after being left so long asleep?" He didn't answer at once. His eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Not heat, not urgency, but something older, steadier. "No," he said quietly. "Not strange." He hesitated, then brushed the last flecks of lichen from the far side of the bench. "May I?" "Of course." He sat, not too near but not far, and together they looked out over the orchard, the long rows stretching ahead like lines of quiet memory. "Jessup says they only need time and care," she said. "They'll have both," Nathaniel replied. She looked down at her gloved hands, folded neatly in her lap. "I think I'm beginning to understand what a place like this requires." "And what is that?" "Presence," she said. "Nothing louder than that." Nathaniel didn't speak, but she felt the weight of his attention, full and unhurried. After a moment he stood and offered his hand. She rose, brushing his fingers lightly. Warmth passed between them, faint but unmistakable. They walked back through the orchard together. The branches arched above them, bare still, but full of promise. Chapter 16. The Letter. The day began with a thin sun and a restless wind. Spring had edged forward another inch overnight, and the light filtering through Eleanor's chamber window had a new clarity to it. She rose early, still thinking of the orchard, of the scent of moss and young bark, of the way Nathaniel's voice had softened when he spoke of his grandfather. There was something growing between them, no declarations, no certainty, but something that lived in shared silence and brief glances, in the feel of walking side by side. It was enough. She took breakfast alone, as had become her quiet habit. A soft boiled egg in its cup, a slice of toasted bread with apricot preserves, and a small dish of stewed apples. The tea was strong, poured from a silver pot that had long preceded her arrival. Simple, warm things. The kind that made her feel, if not quite at home, then at least steady. She was reaching for her second cup when the footman appeared at the doorway, his gloved hands carrying a single letter on a silver tray. "From town, my lady. Arrived with the early post." She took it without thinking. The wax seal was pale blue, the Strathmore crest pressed into it with sharp precision. Lady Strathmore. The envelope was immaculate. The paper smelled faintly of rosewater and starch. Eleanor stared at her name in the familiar, looping script. neat, controlled, inevitable. She opened it slowly, as though the words might strike more softly if she gave them time. My dearest Eleanor, I trust this letter finds you well, and that Ashbourne Hall continues to suit your needs. I am told the weather in Warwickshire has been unusually mild. I write not out of sentiment, but necessity. I have received word that you have begun to engage socially in the village. While I appreciate your eagerness, I must urge restraint. A countess must be seen not merely as presentable, but exemplary. It is unwise to assume goodwill will carry you far without the proper foundation. Additionally, the matter of your presentation remains unresolved. As you are now married, it will be expected that Lord Ashbourne present you formally during the season. This is not a suggestion. There are appearances to maintain. I will make inquiries and prepare introductions accordingly. I trust you will approach this responsibility with the decorum it requires. With every expectation of your discretion, Lady Strathmore. Eleanor read the letter twice. The tone was as she remembered, polished, instructive, and cold beneath its courtesy. Guidance dressed as kindness, bound tightly around reminders of what she owed, and to whom. But it was the line about Nathaniel that held her still. It will be expected that Lord Ashbourne present you formally. It had never occurred to her. Not really. Not aloud. She had begun to imagine her place here as something quiet and steady, shaped in garden walks and shared dinners, built slowly, on terms she thought were theirs alone. But now it had been named. They would be watched, measured, expected to perform the marriage others had arranged. And what if he wasn't ready for that? What if she wasn't? She folded the letter and set it aside, her hand resting on top of it for a long, unmoving moment. Alice entered a few minutes later with fresh linen for the bed. Something from town? She asked, glancing at the paper. Just a letter, Eleanor said. She didn't lie. She only withheld the weight of it. Then she rose, crossed to the window, and stood there for some time, watching the wind stir the hedges. There was a tightness in her chest, not pain, but pressure. The kind that comes when something fragile is asked to hold a shape too quickly. It would be so easy to retreat, to become small enough to fit the version of herself others had drawn. But she would not. She turned from the window and left the room. Later, that morning, she walked through the upper gallery, her fingers trailing the polished banister. A vase of winter roses, nearly withered, sat on a side table. She paused beside it, removed the worst of the stems, and straightened the rest. She should have left it for one of the maids, but the small act steadied her. A short while later, she passed Nathaniel outside the library. "Good morning," he said, slowing his steps. "Good morning, my lord." He glanced at the letter in her hand, though she'd half tucked it beneath a book. "Troubling news?" "No," she said, lifting her eyes to his. Only a familiar voice. Nathaniel studied her for a moment but didn't press. "If there's anything you need." "Thank you," she said quietly. "I believe I have what I need just now." She continued on, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and starch. Nathaniel's study, later that afternoon. Nathaniel sat at his desk, a pen in his hand and an unopened ledger before him. He hadn't read the letter, but he had read her face. She had passed him with composure, not brittle or guarded, just self-contained. It wasn't what he had expected, and that stayed with him. He could guess who the letter was from. He had grown up parsing his aunt's phrasing, her carefully barbed observations. She never raised her voice. She simply reminded you of how much you owed, and how little of it you were managing to repay. He imagined what Eleanor had read, but she had not flinched. She hadn't complained or asked for reassurance. She had simply gone on, steady in her own skin. That kind of strength was easy to overlook, but it was not easy to forget. Nathaniel set the pen aside. The ledger could wait. He left the study and went in search of Eleanor, the letter still lingering in his thoughts. He found her in the conservatory, standing near the tall windows, her hands lightly clasped before her. She was watching the light shift across the stone path outside, her expression unreadable. "Eleanor?" She turned, startled, though not displeased. "My lord." "I wanted to ask—" He paused. "Was it from Lady Strathmore?" She nodded once. "Yes." He studied her face. "May I ask what she said?" She hesitated, then gestured toward a bench by the window. "You may as well sit." He did. "She reminded me of my place," Eleanor said, her voice even. "Warned me not to mistake goodwill for belonging. Cautioned me against thinking kindness is the same as approval." Nathaniel's jaw tensed. That sounds like her. "She also said that if I wish to be presented this season, it must be done properly. With you." He was quiet. "She offered to advise me," Eleanor added, as if I should be grateful for the favour. His brow furrowed. "And do you want to be presented?" She gave a small shake of her head. "Not like that. Not on someone else's terms." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then calmly, "We'll go when we're ready, not before." Her eyes met his. "And if we never are?" "Then we won't go." The quiet between them deepened, not tense, but full. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she said. He stood, but didn't step away just yet. "She shouldn't have written to you," he said, "but I'm glad you showed it to me." She gave a faint smile. "I wasn't sure if I should." "Next time, let me read it first." "And what would you do?" "Burn it," he said, "or send back something sharper." She laughed softly, but it was real. He turned to go, but paused at the doorway. "When we go to London," he said, "we'll go on your terms, or not at all." And this time, when he left, the door clicked shut behind him with quiet certainty. Chapter 17. The Invitation. Ashbourne Hall, early May 1814. The sun had begun to warm the stones of the east terrace. The crocuses were gone now, their early colour faded into memory. In their place came tulips and forget-me-nots, bright against the dark soil, and the heavy scent of lilac drifted from the wall near the rose trellis. The air carried the first real breath of spring, not just promise, but presence. Eleanor had taken to walking alone most mornings now, her bonnet in hand, her shawl gathered around her shoulders as the breeze stirred the length of her skirts. She no longer felt like a guest. Not entirely. It was still too early to call it home, but the silence of Ashbourne no longer felt like judgment. Some days, it even felt like peace. So when the letter arrived, sealed in blue wax and pressed into stiff parchment, she sensed what it would contain before she opened it. Alice brought it to her where she sat in the library, cowper open on her lap and a small basket of mending resting by her feet. Not touched, only present. She had brought it out of habit more than purpose, a quiet relic of her vicarage days. Here it looked a little out of place. "It came by courier, my lady," Alice said. Eleanor turned it over. The crest was unmistakable. Lady Strathmore. She broke the seal with careful fingers and unfolded the sheet. The handwriting was familiar. Sweeping loops and elegant curves, polished to the point of calculation. "My dearest Eleanor, I trust you are enjoying the quiet of Ashbourne, though I am quite certain a little society will do you good. You will be pleased to know that the Duke of Wetherby's house party begins the second week of June. You and the Earl will, of course, be expected to attend together. The Duchess has been assured of your presence, and it is understood that Ashbourne will be properly represented. It is time. Yours in affection and assurance, Lady S." Eleanor stared at the words. Expected? informed, accepted. There was no question of whether she wished to go, just the assumption that she would appear, polished, presentable, and prepared to represent the Ashbourne name. She rose from the window seat, the letter still in her hand. "Alice," she said quietly, "will you ask the Earl if I might speak with him before luncheon?" Alice blinked. "Of course, my lady." Later that morning, Nathaniel was already in the study when she arrived. The fire was lit, the scent of old paper and ink curling into the warm air. He glanced up as she entered, surprise flickering in his expression. "Lady Ashbourne." "I received a letter from your aunt," Eleanor said without preamble. "She expects us to attend the Wetherby gathering in June." His mouth tightened. "Of course she does. She's informed the Duchess that I've accepted." Nathaniel exhaled through his nose and stood, crossing to the sideboard. "Would you like sherry?" "No, thank you." He poured himself a small glass and turned back, leaning against the edge of the sideboard. "She's made her intentions clear," he said. "We are to be displayed." "Presented," Eleanor corrected gently. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. "I would prefer not to arrive alone." He inclined his head. "Then I shall accompany you." She gave a small nod, as though it were merely a practical matter, but something in her shoulders eased. "You'll need proper gowns," he said. "I was thinking Lady Langford might know someone suitable," Eleanor replied. "Perhaps in Leamington." Nathaniel nodded. "She will, and she'll know the sort of thing that's expected." "Thank you," Eleanor said. She hesitated, then looked up again. "I won't embarrass you, Nathaniel. I may not be what you expected, but I do not intend to be a burden." His brows lifted. "You are not a burden, Eleanor." She blinked. The words had been said without hesitation, and something in her heart curled toward them, unsure and aching. "Thank you," she said again, more softly. That evening, a quiet flurry began. Lady Langford arrived the following day, full of ideas and fabric swatches. She stayed for tea and insisted on a second gown for the masquerade, something daring enough to cause interest, but not scandal. Miss Talbot's measurements were forwarded at once to Leamington Spa. Ashbourne Hall, which had slept all winter, began to stir. Trunks were brought down from attics, gloves were checked for wear, shoe buckles polished. Eleanor's room became a small kingdom of cloth and thread and folded muslin. And Eleanor herself, never loud, never boastful, began to change. Not in essence, but in carriage, in posture, in the way she met Nathaniel's gaze when he passed her in the corridor, no longer uncertain, but composed. He noticed. Of course he did. One evening, he stood outside the drawing room with a brandy in his hand, listening to the low hum of her voice as she laughed with Lady Langford behind the doors. He did not enter. He did not interrupt. But he stayed longer than he meant to. Something was shifting, and he did not yet know what it would cost him. Chapter 18. Arrival in Town. London, June, 1814. The London air was a different kind of heavy. Not the damp quiet of Warwickshire fields, but the charged, restless weight of a city in bloom and in motion. Horses clattered over cobblestones, carriage wheels rattled in tight lanes, and voices rose in every direction. Market sellers shouted, footmen ran errands, bells chimed, doors slammed, and distant music drifted faintly from an open window above. Eleanor sat upright in the carriage, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had never been to London in spring. She had never been to London at all. The buildings loomed taller here, all stately rows of pale stone and black iron railings. Everything was cleaner and grander than she had expected, and louder. Her eyes flitted from shop fronts to flower carts, from uniformed servants to sharply dressed gentlemen who crossed the street, without seeming to notice the fine dust stirred up by passing wheels. It was beautiful and overwhelming. Nathaniel sat across from her, one gloved hand resting against his jaw as he looked out the window. He had said little since they left Ashbourne that morning. His gaze was unreadable, but not cold, simply distant. The closer they drew to Mayfair, the more Eleanor could feel herself folding inward. She pressed a hand to her middle, as if to quiet something restless beneath her stays. She had spent weeks preparing. Lady Langford had guided her through the etiquette of town visits, chosen fabrics with strategic elegance, and reminded her more than once that charm was far more powerful than perfection. But now, with London pressing in on every side, Eleanor could only think of one thing: do not let them see you afraid. The carriage slowed and turned. They passed beneath the stone arch of Wetherby House, where a line of liveried footmen waited on the circular drive. The facade was grand but not gaudy. 4 stories of pale stone with columns at the entry and rows of windows hung with spring garlands. Nathaniel stepped down first, then turned to offer his hand. His grip was warm, firm, steady. She took it. The moment her slipper touched the step, Eleanor heard her name. Lady Ashbourne. A young woman, no more than 20, with red curls pinned beneath a lavender bonnet, came fluttering down the steps like a spring breeze wrapped in ribbons. "I am so pleased to meet you. I'm Miss Juliet Wetherby. Well, the Duke's niece. Not that it matters. Everyone is quite informal by the 3rd day." Eleanor smiled automatically. "It's very kind of you to receive us." Juliet turned to Nathaniel. "And you, Lord Ashbourne. You are taller than I expected." Nathaniel blinked. "I see." Juliet looked back at Eleanor. "I've been dying to meet you. Lady Langford has spoken of nothing else. You're far prettier than she let on, which is just like her. She likes to surprise us." Eleanor's smile tightened, but she managed a small laugh. "She is very dear to me." "She's here already," Juliet added, and positively glowing with pride. "We've placed you in the blue suite. It has the best view and the best light for dressing. You'll want that for Thursday." Eleanor's heart skipped. "What happens Thursday?" "The masquerade ball, of course," Juliet said brightly. "But don't worry, you've time to find a mask." Nathaniel's voice was quiet behind her. "We won't keep you long in the entry, Miss Wetherby." "Oh yes, of course." Juliet flushed and gestured them forward. "Come in. Everyone's upstairs in the morning room. But if you'd like a moment to settle first." "We would," Nathaniel said. Juliet, unfazed, grinned. "Then I shall leave you to your footman and your trunks and see you at dinner. Do try the syllabub. Cook is very proud of it." With that, she turned and flitted away like a ribbon caught in the wind. Eleanor let herself be guided inside, and for the first time since stepping into the carriage that morning, she exhaled. The interior of Wetherby House was warm with gold light and polished wood. Flowers adorned nearly every table. A wide staircase curved up toward the 2nd floor, and Eleanor caught the distant sound of a harp drifting down from somewhere above. They were announced, and a footman led them upstairs. As they reached the landing, Eleanor glanced back and caught Nathaniel's eye. "I don't think I know how to breathe here," she whispered. He offered the faintest smile. "Then don't let them see you try." The blue suite lived up to its name. The bed hangings were pale blue silk with embroidered edging. The sitting area overlooked a small park, and the dressing room had already been laid with lavender-scented linens. There was no second arrangement, no adjoining door, no shared room. Whatever they were to the world, they were not yet husband and wife in the truest sense. Eleanor had not spoken of it. Neither had he. But she found herself embarrassed by the separate rooms, as though they marked her failure to live up to her title. Alice unpacked in quiet efficiency while Eleanor stood at the window. She was not the same girl who had arrived at Ashbourne in the rain, but she was not yet the woman this world expected her to be. That evening, dressed in soft blue muslin and pearl combs, she stepped into the drawing room beside her husband and felt the first real stir of confidence. Not borrowed from Lady Langford, not stitched into a bodice, but rising from within. Lady Langford appeared not long after dinner began, sweeping into the room with her usual blend of warmth and dry observation. She greeted Eleanor with a kiss to the cheek and a low, "Better light in here than last year, thank heaven." Eleanor smiled. "You've come just in time." "I always do," Clara said. Besides, someone had to be here to deflect Selina. Eleanor's smile tightened. "She's here." Clara's tone was dry. "Oh, yes, wearing emeralds and ready for sport." Selina arrived not long after, her gown dark green and cut just shy of scandalous. Her entrance was practiced, her smile perfected, her eyes already scanning the room. When they landed on Nathaniel, something sharpened. She crossed the room with a glass of wine in hand and paused, just a breath too close to Eleanor. "Lady Ashbourne," she said, her voice smooth. "You look quite well. London seems to agree with you." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "It's been kind so far." Selina turned her gaze to Nathaniel. "Lord Ashbourne," she said with a practiced warmth. "How long it's been." Nathaniel gave a shallow bow. "Miss Harbury." "You're even more handsome than I remember," she added lightly, brushing the edge of her necklace, drawing attention to her collarbone. "The quiet ones always are." Eleanor remained silent. The expression on Nathaniel didn't change. "You flatter me, though I imagine you say as much to every man in a cravat." Lady Langford let out a cough that might have been a laugh. Selina's smile froze for half a second before recovering. "Not every man," she said sweetly, "just the ones worth noticing." Nathaniel turned to Eleanor. "Shall I fetch you a glass of wine?" "Yes," she said, keeping her tone steady. "Thank you." He left without another word to Selina. Lady Langford leaned in. "Well played," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly." Conversation moved on, but Eleanor noted how Selina's laughter never quite reached Nathaniel again. Lady Strathmore was notably absent. When Eleanor asked quietly, Clara only said, "She prefers to appear only when she can command the room. House parties require too much lingering." Still, Eleanor felt the gap her absence left behind. Not a relief exactly, but a space, like a door that might open at any moment, without warning. Later, after the guests had dispersed and the music had faded, Nathaniel offered Eleanor his arm as they made their way upstairs. "Has she always been like that?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Selina," he said. "Always." She nodded, but said nothing else. And when they parted for the night, in separate rooms still, she did not feel shaken, only more certain. Whatever she had feared about London, she had faced it, and tomorrow she would do so again. Chapter 19. Masks and Measures. The second morning in London arrived with clear skies and a silver gleam to the air, as though the city itself had polished its facade for the season. A tower of calling cards, gilt-edged invitations, and ribbon-bound notes awaited in the drawing room, a social artillery barrage launched by the curious and the titled alike. Juliet Weatherby carried the tray up herself, cheeks flushed and eyes sparkling. She swept into Eleanor's sitting room like a victorious general. "They're all asking after you," she announced, sinking into a chair with a bounce. "Well, you and the Earl, but mostly you. They want to see if the stories are true." Eleanor looked up from her tea. "Stories?" Juliet grinned. "That he married some ethereal country beauty and hid her away in Warwickshire, or that you're a political pawn, or possibly a secret Catholic." She leaned in conspiratorially. I'm hoping for the Catholic. From the corner, Margaret made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. I'm afraid I'm disappointingly Anglican, Eleanor replied, smiling faintly. Juliet sighed. Pity. Still, you'll need something marvellous to wear to the masquerade. Everyone will be watching. Eleanor reached for her cup, hiding her nerves behind thin porcelain. Then I suppose I had better look like someone worth watching. Juliet brightened instantly. That's the spirit. I'll send for Madame Fournier at once. The rest of the day dissolved into silks and opinions. Madame Fournier arrived with the authority of a woman who had dressed duchesses and broken hearts, sweeping through the rooms with pins already bristling between her fingers. She circled Eleanor slowly, assessing her colouring, her posture, her stillness of manner. Yes, she murmured at last, I see it. But only if the Countess dares. By late afternoon, Eleanor stood motionless in the centre of the room, while pale gold satin was draped and pinned to her frame. The gown was cut in the Grecian style, its bodice sculpted over her corset in clean, classical lines. Silver thread would be worked through the fabric, not in patterns bold enough to announce themselves, but in delicate traces that caught the light like breath on glass. It will move like water, Madame Fournier promised. The hem waited, just so. The embroidery only a whisper. Satin must never shout. And the mask? Eleanor asked. White silk, Madame Fournier replied, edged with pearls. Innocence is far more intriguing when it is deliberate. Eleanor nodded, though a tightness curled beneath her ribs. Will he even dance with me? She asked softly, scarcely aware she had spoken aloud. Madame Fournier did not hear her, but Margaret did. If he doesn't, Margaret said gently from the corner, pausing in her folding, someone else will. That evening, Eleanor dressed for dinner with careful attention. She chose a gown of soft lavender silk, the colour delicate as twilight pressed into bloom. The bodice was fitted but unostentatious, trimmed with narrow amethyst ribbon that caught the candlelight in quiet flashes. The neckline revealed nothing immodest, yet suggested a vulnerability that felt more daring than excess. Her hair was arranged half up, secured with silver pins, while a few dark curls were left to fall freely against her neck and shoulders, intentional in their looseness, soft as unspoken things. She did not expect him to say anything, which made it all the more disarming when Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked, as they entered the dining room and said, in a voice pitched for her alone, That shade, it doesn't ask for attention. She glanced up, uncertain. It holds it, he added. Her breath caught before she could stop it. That almost sounds like a compliment. It is. He did not smile. But something in his expression shifted, not warmth, precisely, but focus, as if he were seeing her, not the gown. He offered his arm. And she took it, not because she must, but because she wanted to. Dinner was formal in structure, but gentle in spirit. The table gleamed with spring fare, salmon glazed with lemon and dill, new potatoes tossed in butter and chives, asparagus softened with cream and nutmeg, and white rolls still warm from the oven. For dessert, syllabub appeared once more, this time scented with rosewater and topped with crystallized violets. Eleanor ate little, but smiled often. Lady Clara Langford, seated nearby, observed her with quiet approval, offering a nod that felt almost like benediction. The Duke and Duchess were gracious, and Juliet took clear pleasure in making introductions. This is Lady Clevedon. She once danced with the Prince Regent and never lets anyone forget it. And Lord Montcairn. Please don't mention foxes. It's complicated. It might have been overwhelming. But Nathaniel never left Eleanor's side. He spoke when necessary, remained silent when not, his presence neither intrusive nor distant, simply steady, certain. and that constancy soothed her more than she had expected. Later, when the candles burned low and the guests began to drift away, Eleanor paused at the foot of the staircase and turned. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked. He regarded her carefully. "To the masquerade?" "Yes." He hesitated, long enough to make her heart falter. Then quietly, "I will be there." She searched his face. "Will you wear a mask?" One corner of his mouth lifted. "Do you think I need one?" She held his gaze. "Only if you wish to be someone else." That surprised him. She saw it in the brief stillness of his posture. He inclined his head. "Good night, Lady Ashbourne." She climbed the stairs with her pulse fluttering behind her like a ribbon come undone. Chapter 20. The Mask and the Truth. The night of the masquerade arrived on a warm breeze, with music spilling from open windows and the scent of night jasmine drifting across the garden. Lanterns hung from the trees like floating stars, casting golden light onto gravel paths and manicured hedges. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with silk and glass, and laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. At the top of the staircase, Eleanor stood still. Her gown was unlike anything she had worn before. Ivory silk, fitted at the bodice and swept off the shoulders, with a shimmer like moonlight poured into fabric. A champagne ribbon traced the neckline, and a matching silk mask, edged in silver thread, concealed her eyes. Her heart beat hard in her chest. Let them look, she thought. Let them wonder. And she descended the stairs. At first, the crowd did not notice. There were too many feathers, too many jewels, too many bright voices already filling the room. But as she passed beneath the chandeliers, someone turned. Then another. A hush fell, brief, but real. Heads turned. Fans fluttered. Whispers floated above the string quartet like dust motes in light. She heard none of it. Lady Clara Langford stood near the refreshment table and gave a slow, pleased smile. "There you are, my dear," she murmured as Eleanor passed. "They'll all be talking, but not for the reasons they expect." Eleanor made her way to the edge of the room, anchoring herself in the rhythm of the music. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Until she saw him. Nathaniel stood near a marble column, speaking to a gentleman in a dark domino cloak. His mask was black, simple, edged in a narrow line of gold. But it was not the mask she noticed. It was the way he looked at her when he saw her. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. There was no flicker of recognition, not at first. Only stillness. And then, slowly, something in his expression changed. Not desire, not shock, something quieter and deeper. She held his gaze, and he crossed the floor. He reached her without ceremony, without pretense, without needing permission. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Her voice was steady. "Yes." The waltz began, slow and aching, like memory turned into music. He took her in his arms, and she let him. They moved together as if they had waited all season for this one song. Their steps were effortless, their silences full. They did not speak. They did not need to. It was a dance that said everything. "I see you. I have seen you. I choose you." She had never felt so seen, and he had never seen her so clearly. As the final notes faded, Eleanor found her hand still resting in his. He leaned in just slightly. "Will you walk with me?" "Yes." They stepped off the floor. The crowd pressed around them but did not touch them. Not truly. Juliet Weatherby passed with a delighted gasp and whispered, well, that was telling, to no one in particular. At the far end of the ballroom, a door opened to a quiet hall. From there, another corridor led toward the guest suites. The ballroom still glittered behind them, but Eleanor no longer heard the music. Her hand rested on Nathaniel's arm as they climbed the stairs, the hush of the corridor swallowing the sound of strings and voices. The mask she wore, velvet and silver, light as breath, now dangled from her fingers, forgotten. They walked slowly, as though neither wished to rush what came next. But neither paused either. Not until they turned down the final corridor. A figure stepped into view. Lady Selina stood at the far end of the hallway, wrapped in a dark sapphire shawl, her expression unreadable as she took them in. Eleanor in her pale gown, her hair slightly loosened from the dance. Nathaniel steady at her side, every inch a man who had made a decision. The pause was brief. Nathaniel inclined his head. Lady Selina. She arched a brow. Lord Ashbourne. Lady Ashbourne. Her gaze slid from one to the other, calculating and cool. I hadn't realised the masquerade extended upstairs. Eleanor said nothing, her face composed. But Nathaniel didn't move on. His voice sharpened, just slightly. I believe the Earl and Countess of Ashbourne are free to retire without commentary. Selina's smile thinned. Of course. I do hope the arrangement is mutually satisfying. The words struck like a sting. But before Eleanor could respond, Nathaniel spoke. Quiet, clear, unwavering. You forget yourself, Selina. She blinked. My wife, he said, is not a subject for speculation. Not by you, not by anyone. Selina said nothing more, but she stepped back. Eleanor lifted her chin as they passed, not with triumph, but with grace. When they reached the door to her suite, Nathaniel paused. His hand hovered near the latch, but didn't reach for it. Eleanor looked up at him. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. I would not think less of you. He didn't speak. But in the way he looked at her, steady, searching, was a question. And an answer. She turned the handle, and he stepped inside. The fire had burned low in the hearth. Moonlight spilled across the floor in silver ribbons. The door clicked shut behind them. Eleanor turned. The ribbons of her mask still curled between her fingers. Her hair had fallen loose from its pins, softening the lines of her face, and the silk of her gown shimmered with each quiet breath. Nathaniel didn't move. He simply looked at the woman who had walked beside him, danced with him, stood beside him even when the world watched. You were kind to me tonight, she said. I meant every word. And when you said I wasn't a burden. He stepped closer, touching her cheek with quiet reverence. I should have said it long ago. You are brave, Eleanor. Brave and brilliant and far more than I deserve. No, she said, steady now. Don't say that. Not tonight. He exhaled, and the last of the distance between them dissolved. He brushed a lock of hair from her temple, his fingertips trailing heat in their wake. Her hand rose to his chest, feeling the beat of his heart beneath the layers of linen and self-control. When she kissed him, soft, sure, he kissed her back like a man unravelling. It was not a storm. It was a yielding. They undressed slowly, without rush, without flourish, only the sound of silk falling and breath caught between touch and trust. He touched her as if memorizing. She responded as though she was waking. When they came together, skin to skin, heart to heart, it was not lust that carried them. It was something older, something earned. He cupped the back of her neck. She arched into him, not with fear, but with absolute trust. He whispered her name, and she let herself fall. Eleanor awoke just before dawn, in the stillness before light. She lay nestled against him, the sheets tangled around them, her cheek resting on his shoulder. One of his arms wrapped around her waist, the other draped across his chest, fingers lightly curled, as if still holding the memory of her. She shifted, and his eyes opened. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. "Good morning," he said, his voice low, rough with sleep. She smiled. "Is it?" "It will be." She traced his collarbone with one finger. "Are you always this certain before breakfast?" He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "No. But this, I'm sure of." She let herself breathe then, fully. All the silences, all the careful words, all the glances, all of it had led here, not to perfection, to presence, to peace. "I never thought this life would be mine," she whispered. "And now?" "Now I want it. All of it." He leaned in and kissed her again, slow, unhurried, full of something deep and sure. "You have it." And they stayed there, in the quiet, until morning brushed the walls in gold. When the house stirred with bells and footsteps and breakfast trays, the Earl and Countess of Ashbourne remained where they were, together, at last. Epilogue. 1 year later, Ashbourne Hall. The orchard had bloomed early that year. Petals drifted from the branches like pale confetti, settling in soft drifts along the mossy path. The sunlight was warm but gentle, filtered through boughs heavy with young fruit. There was a hush in the air, not silence, but the kind of peace that only comes after a long winter has finally let go. Eleanor sat beneath the old russet apple tree, the one Mr. Jessup claimed had survived 3 storms and a fire. A quilt was spread beneath her, and her hand rested lightly on the curve of her belly. A quiet swell beneath her gown, noticeable now, not hidden, not flaunted, simply part of her. From the slope above, she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Nathaniel appeared a moment later, sleeves rolled to the forearms, his coat slung over one shoulder, and a large wicker hamper balanced in his arms. He looked entirely at ease, wind-touched, smiling, every inch the man she had come to love in every season. "I come bearing gifts," he announced, setting the hamper carefully on the quilt. "Oh dear," Eleanor said, eyeing him with amused suspicion. "What did Cook insist on this time?" "Nothing too extravagant," he said innocently, beginning to unpack. The hamper betrayed him. Cold roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, a round of soft cheese wrapped in muslin, slices of oat bread, a jar of lemon curd, 2 golden hand pies dusted with sugar, a chilled bottle of cider nestled in linen. Even proper glasses, not tin, not crystal, but something pleasingly in between. Eleanor raised a brow. "This isn't a picnic. This is a seduction." "Just good planning," he said, unwrapping the cheese with a smile. They ate slowly, without hurry, letting the day stretch around them. When she leaned into him, Nathaniel slipped one arm around her shoulders, the other hand resting lightly over hers, where it curved protectively across her stomach. "I can feel her more every day," she murmured. "Him?" Nathaniel replied, grinning. She gave him a sidelong look. "Still clinging to that hope?" "Fiercely, but I'll love either one with the same foolish devotion." She laughed, a soft, round sound, and then grew quiet. "Do you think we'll be ready?" "No," he said honestly. "But we'll love the child more than enough to make up for it." She turned her face toward his. "You've changed." "So have you." "Into what?" He reached up and brushed a fallen blossom from her hair. "Into someone I never imagined," he said, "but always needed." The breeze shifted again, warm and slow through the orchard, carrying the scent of apple blossom and new grass and the early sweetness of spring. Eleanor leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes. Around them, the world was blooming. And for the first time, not in pretense, not in hope, but in truth, they were beginning. Together. The end. Thanks for spending part of your day with this story. If you liked it, go ahead and tap that subscribe button. It's free, painless, and oddly satisfying. I'll be here with another tale soon, unless I've floated off into the clouds like this little bell. See you next time.